Good morning. Hope everyone is well. And I'm going to ask Chairman Epps if he would to do an invocation for us this morning. Amen. Thank you, sir. We are so honored to have with us this morning the senator from the rolling, beautiful hills of northeast Georgia and surrounding areas, Senator Gooch, to come before us to present Senate Bill 366. And Senator, the podium is yours, and welcome.
Well, good morning. How's y'all doing? We're almost finished with this session, so aren't you all happy? I want to present to you SB 366. It's an important piece of legislation that the Senate worked on over the last year or so under the leadership and guidance of Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle and his staff, Irene Munn and others. We had a study committee and a task force that looked at local law enforcement compensation last summer and fall. And as a result of that study, there were 4 bills that were produced, which are working through the Senate and the House this year. And I believe you've already seen a couple of those. There's 3 others that aren't in this committee, but they're pertaining to local law enforcement and their assistance in their compensation. But let me give you a couple of stats, because I know y'all know the importance of our law enforcement officers here in Georgia. In 2017, there were 128 law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty. In 2018, this was as of late February, there were already 17 more killed just in the 2 months of the year. In comparison to that, 33 members of our armed services were killed in action in 2017. So let me repeat that. There were 128 law enforcement officers killed in action in our country last year. Only 33 armed service members were killed in the entire country. So that's give you some comparison of the significance of that. 4 times as many law enforcement officers were killed on American soil protecting our communities than they were abroad in our armed forces. 6 of Georgia's law enforcement officers were killed in 2017. And all of you remember just last month, Officer Chase Maddox of the Locust Grove Police Department was the first killed in Georgia this year. On average, a law enforcement officer makes about $40,770 a year. The average starting pay for a deputy sheriff in Georgia is well below $32,000 per year. These numbers put Georgia at 47th in the nation in pay for law enforcement officers. We know of approximately 1,500 vacancies that are open today in local law enforcement positions. The problem we have is retention and recruiting. Obviously, we're in a good economic time today. We have historic low unemployment rates. Some regions of Georgia have as low as a 3.5%, 3.6% unemployment rate. Our local sheriff's departments and our local police departments are crying out for help, not just for money, but for ways to help retain and recruit local law enforcement officers. At the same time, they're competing against private sector jobs that are paying more and more money. And they're also competing against the Georgia State Patrol salaries that we have increased in the last 2 years around the state. So with that, we put together several bills, and SB 366 is an attempt not to fund law enforcement positions at the state level, but to basically shine a light on where the problems are in the state. There are about 120 Tier 1 counties in Georgia. Those are the poorest counties in the state. They have the highest unemployment rates. They have the lowest tax digest, and they have the lowest per capita incomes in the state. those are the counties that we've discovered that have the biggest challenge in recruiting and retaining law enforcement positions, and they also have some of the lowest wages for their law enforcement officers. We did a lot of work in that committee, in that task force. We had people from local governments on that task force, cities and counties. We had sheriffs, we had police chiefs, and we had a good debate on that. So this bill basically requires cities and counties each year to submit their compensation for their law enforcement personnel. All their post-certified personnel, their salary information will be submitted to the Department of Community Affairs, and that information would be gathered by the Department of Community Affairs, and they would lump that data together by regional commission, and they would produce a compensation report and a guidance report that would go back to the local communities each year, and it would help the cities and the counties to develop a pay scale. It wouldn't be a mandate that they would have to pay their officers this amount, but it would show what other counties of equal size and comparable demographics and population, it would show what those law enforcement officers in those regions are making. Hopefully it would help encourage those elected officials back home to find the resources to increase the pay of those law enforcement officials, and it would also encourage them to adopt pay scales. One of the things that we discovered in our task force, and which I knew from my background in local government, was that a lot of counties in Georgia don't even have a pay scale at the local level. They don't have merit systems. They don't have good policies and procedures in places. There's some counties that do not have a human resources department. So we believe this information is going to be important to help put back the attention where it needs to go and let the local community help encourage elected officials to do the right thing, and that is to step up and start paying a competitive wage for their law enforcement officers. Mr. Chairman, I can go through the bill step by step, but most of it's pretty self-explanatory. It just sets out dates and requirements that this information has to be done every year. There is a stick in the bill, and when I say that, what I mean is if the counties do not comply with the requirement of putting the data in at the end of the year, then they are subject to losing what's called their qualified local government status. If you've ever been a local government official, you know what that means. You can't get state funds or grants or permits from the state if you do not keep your QLG status in active status. And so that is a requirement in this bill, that if they don't comply with the reporting requirements of this bill, then they could lose that QLG status. They could also have it reinstated immediately upon reporting that data. So we don't believe that's a big issue. Local governments were involved in the creation of this bill like they do in many other bills. And so with that, I'll yield for any questions.
Okay, you do have a question in the back, the minority whip, Ms. Hughley.
Exacerbate the problems that sheriffs said to us, that when they're paying low wages and the county next door is doing a little bit better, they lose their officers to the counties next door. So did any sheriff or anybody express that concern as you were going through this?
Absolutely. I think it depends on where you live. I can give you a comparison. In my hometown, when I was a commissioner in Lumpkin County, we would always compete with Dawson County and Forsyth County. The closer you get to a metropolitan region, the higher the pay is for most people. And that's true in the private sector jobs as well. You can come to Atlanta and make a lot more money per se than you can out in a rural part of the state. And so the sheriffs are always competing with those counties to their, I guess you would say, adjacent to them, which are closer to a more urbanized or higher populated area. So what the bill would do, and the sheriffs support this bill 100%, this bill would help give the sheriff the data and the facts that they believe they already know to be true. They would go to the county commissioners and they would go out into the public and say, look, we have 10% of our workforce, we have vacancies we can't find. We're having to pay overtime 10, 15 hours per pay period because of the vacancies and the unfilled positions we have. And here's the reason why. We have all of these other counties closer to Atlanta or to our south or to our north, whatever it may be, that are paying more than us. And so if one county is paying 20% more than another county, then obviously those counties are going to have a lot more difficulty in trying to keep good paid employees in that department. So yes, the sheriffs support this because it gives them a tool to be able to go to their commissioners and at budget time especially and put this information in front of them and say, we need to pay our employees a more competitive wage.
Representative Tarvin.
Thank you, Senator Gooch. You may have covered this, and I don't hear well, but do you have a feel for the number of people that are on local law enforcement, whether it includes the jailers or not, across the state? Have y'all, I mean, it may be something y'all have not talked about, but I just wondered if we knew how many there were.
How many there were total?
Yeah, in the
in
state
law
of,
enforcement?
in local law enforcement in the state of Georgia.
We discussed that in our meetings, Representative, and I want to say there were 15,000, but don't hold me to that.
And I'll get back to you on that if you got
Okay.
that number. And thanks, sir.
Yeah, I mean, there's thousands. In fact, there were hundreds that are drawing welfare benefits because their pay is so low. They have, a spouse that maybe it doesn't work, that are raising children at home. And so several of these personnel that we have walking the streets every day protecting our lives are having to depend on welfare benefits and food stamps to pay to help raise their children. And that's sad that we have that situation in Georgia.
Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator, I wanted to ask you, you may have mentioned this, I walked in a couple minutes late, but is this information on the salary of local deputies and so on, is that publicly available now?
It is not mandatory in a sense to where they're going to report it the way this is requiring it to be reported. DCA does salary collection each year through counties, and so this tightens up that language and it requires them to submit. In fact, your Chairman Welch, I believe, tightened it up to where they have to report W-2 numbers. That way you include your overtime dollars as well. So this gives it a much cleaner definition, and it also does it by job titles. That way you can compare apples to apples from county to county.
Okay, I mean, it seems like what you're doing is a good thing. I'm just wondering, do you think that this would lead to any kind of subsidization of some of these smaller counties that have lower salaries? I guess I'm always fearful of these local governments. We're always trying to get the larger counties to subsidize them.
Yeah, as of the way this bill's written today, there'd be no subsidization in it, but I think what it would do is it would begin the process of creating good data that we can come back year after year and look at where are the deficiencies in our state. Is it truly in a rural area? Is it below a certain population level? What are the problems and how can we address them further? This bill does not put any state resources toward that. Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to ask, Chairman Welch couldn't be here. He had a little bit of a family issue he had to take care of this morning. So I'm going to ask Governor's Floor Leader Terry Rogers to come forward and bring the committee substitute. You have it on your desk. The blue copy is the original Senate bill, and the committee sub is the one you see. Okay, and I think Chairman Ballinger's going to help. Go ahead.
Good morning. First of all, I love coming in and finding out that Andy's not going to be here, and I was not able to be at the meeting about the substitute, but Andy and I had talked about it. Basically, the substitute that is offered, and you're working off of LS 411579S. Basically, Andy has gone through and he's just clarified a few terms and definitions that he thought would be better. He clarified that, but then the main thing that you get to is in the original bill, there was a section about the Department of Community Affairs and a grant. That was completely eliminated, and the reason for the elimination of that was we just felt like there was more data needed before we codified and put a grant into the Department of Community Affairs. We wanted to see maybe just a little bit more. It's a great start to the thing, but we feel like we wanted to make it a data bill rather than a revenue bill.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I was present at the meeting, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you may or may not have. We are working from LC 411579S.
And this is the sub that passed out of subcommittee yesterday. So are there any questions? By committee sub? Move do pass by committee sub. Again, LC 411579S to Senate Bill 366. Have a motion, have seconds. No further discussion. All in favor, let it be known saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.